Hi everyone, this is Matthew Jana for Card Runners, and I'm here with Button and Blind Play Part 6, playing our big blind range on the flop. So let's first go over an outline for the video, then we're going to jump right in. So we're going to go over one slide of theory review, then we're going to randomly generate some flops and list what we do with our entire range. We'll always assume we check our entire range on the flop, unless otherwise noted, and assume our opponent bets between 50 to 60% of the pot. So we just want to assume we're checking and we're facing a very normal size c-bet. So we want to keep in mind that our opponent in the button has the better range and is in position. Because of this, we'll almost never be donk betting. There's also no reason to believe we must defend aggressively enough to prevent the opponent from being able to profitably bet any two cards. Remember, the button gave us an amazing price pre-flop, so we called with a very weak range. Because of that, it's likely okay for our opponent to be able to properly bet any two cards post-flop. But always keep in mind, just because it's profitable for the opponent to bet does not mean betting is more profitable than checking. So just because he can bet any two cards profitably does not mean he should be betting his entire range. Also keep in mind, he's not guaranteed to see a flop in position when he opens on the button, as the small blind and big blind will both 3-bet aggressively in theory. As such, he risks money pre-flop to maybe get to see a flop. We've already talked a lot about it, but the blind should be 3-betting very aggressively against the button open, so the button can't just assume, when he opens that he's always going to get to see a flop in position without having invested very much money. All right, let's jump in. So one last thing to mention before I randomly generate our first flop is you can see right here I've just written down what's the flop, how many combos do we have, what are our strong check raises, weak check raises, all that fun stuff to write down the total combos we're defending. Again, we're not going to know exactly how much we need to defend on each flop, but it's good to write everything down and get an idea of what we actually are defending. And even though I didn't put value check raise or check raise bluff, I put strong check raises and weak check raises because that's technically a little bit more correct than calling something a value check raise or a bluff check raise. You pretty much know what this means. These are the value check raises, these are the check raise bluffs, and then draws are just hands that usually have 35 to 40% equity, robust equity to make a very strong hand. So those hands we don't want to consider value or a bluff, so they have their own category. All right, so here we go. King of diamonds, 7 of spades, 6 of spades. So that's a good flop to get first. That's one that seems like it's a reasonably common board, maybe, a little bit tricky because it's got some draw stuff going on with the 2 connected low cards and the possible flush draw. So right here we're going to look and see we have 520 combos total. So again, the tricky part here is I don't know, I don't really have that great starting point for how many hands I want to defend. So I would just start off with just putting what I think is putting obvious hands in the obvious ranges. So strong check raises. Well, I'm probably going to want to check raise here with something like King 7, which is going to be 12 combos, King 6, which is going to be 12 combos, Pocket 7s, which is going to be 3, and Pocket 6s, which is going to be 3. This is about as many combos of check raises as you're realistically ever going to have for value. I mean, we have 6 set combos, which is a lot, and we have 24 2-pair combos. It's sometimes possible to get 36 2-pair combos if you can make every possible offsuit 2-pair, like if we had 7-6 here, but that's not that common, so this is still quite a lot. So that gets us 30 hands total. We'll talk about the check raise bluffs in a second. Check raise draws. So we want to just check raise some draws, but I would put more emphasis on slow playing, like the nut flush draws if we have them. So we have, the nut flush draw, which is just the ace, 8 of spades. I'm not raising the suited kings. So I'd probably still call with the suited queens, though which flush draws we raise, I don't care all that much. So let's say draw check raises. Go ahead and raise the really, really good ones. Let's see if we have any combo draws. Yeah, we can go ahead and raise 5-4 spades, 5-3 of spades, 4-3 of spades. These hands right here that have very, very robust equity, but they also have no showdown value. They're 5 high. So let's go ahead and raise those. While you can list out all the flush draws, to be honest, what I usually do is I just scroll over this flush draw, see I have 31 combos, and then I'll put something like, all right, let's just say, rather than list them all out, we're going to check raise, 8 of the flush draws. And I definitely would not check raise the ace high or the pair of kings as we talked about. But even for like a much weaker flush draw, like something like 10 to a spades, I can see an argument for check raising it, because what sucks about 10 to a spades is it really sucks to check call the flop and then face another bet on the turn, because you aren't going to like folding and you're not going to like calling, right? So like if you check call on the flop with 10 to a spades and the turn card comes, let's say the 3 of hearts, neither line really seems that good. Like check folding, we don't get to realize our equity. Whereas if we check call, our hand's very weak and our opponent might give up with a bluff on the river and still beat our 10 high, no kicker. So we effectively have like 9 high here. So because of that, I think you can check raise some of these, random 10s and stuff on the flop too. It's probably a very mixed strategy where you can check call some, check raise some. But just be aware that I don't have a huge problem with check raising something like 10 to a spades on the flop, because when you check raise 10 to a spades on the flop, your opponent will mostly defend it by calling. Sometimes he might 3-bet you on the flop, or sometimes he might call on the flop and jam the turn if you bet again. But he's usually a little bit more likely to defend, or significantly more likely to defend by calling. So by check raising 10 to a spades on the flop, you can bet the turn. Hopefully your opponent folds. If he doesn't, he'll usually call. And that kind of lets you see the turn in the river a little bit more easily with 10 to a spades than if you try to check call. But it also requires us to put a lot more money in the pot. So just be aware. Different flush draws can do lots of different things. I just usually put 8 out of the, 31? And so if we're doing 8 out of the 31, we're going to check call 23 flush draws. And I really don't want to double count the pair of kings, so I'm going to take those out right now. So there's 5 that are pair of kings. So really there's only 18 flush draws to check call with that aren't also the top pair. Okay. All right. So let's just keep going with putting like the obvious hands in kind of the obvious range. So we have already gotten rid of all of our 2 pairs. We've gotten rid of all of our sets. We don't have over pairs. All right, let's see. Top pair is how many combos? 72 combos. So check call. 72 combos of top pair seems good to me. King X 72. All right, what else do we have? Next is pocket 8s. Okay, that's 6 combos. So I'm just going down the list here. Sorry, we were here. And now we have middle pair. So that's going to be 7x. And that's 42 combos. I can't scroll my... Well, actually I can. You can see it says 72 combos over here, right, when I scroll over it. Most of you probably already know that, but that's where I'm getting those combos from. All right, so middle pair is 72 combos. 7x. 42 combos. Let's see how many weak. Oops. Let's see how many weak pairs we have. Weak pair we have actually. Oh, because it's counting the under pairs. So let's not call with 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s yet. So let's just count the pairs of 6s we have. So I'm counting. Well, I can see that there's 24 pairs of 5, 4s, 3s, and 2s total, and I have 60 combos total according to Flopzilla. So 60 minus 24, there's 36 combos of 6x. So 6x is 36. Okay. All right. Let's see what sort of other draws we have. Open straight draws. 9, 8, 8, 5, 5, 4. Okay, so don't want to double count the spades. So 9, 8 off is 12. 8, 5 suited is 3. 5, 4 suited is 3. So that's 18. So straight draw. I'll even list these. 9, 8 is 12. 8, 5 suited is 3. 5, 4 suited is 3. So we're, of course, not done yet. Right now, this check calling range is still quite strong. It has a little less than half of the combos are top pair. So we're going to widen out this calling range quite a bit. But I always like to keep, placing the easiest hands where I think they belong. So now I kind of want to work on the weak check raising range, or the check raise bluffs, because I think those are sort of the easiest hands to place right now. Okay, so for this, maybe if we're check raising 30 combos for value, 45 bluffs or so seems fine. You can bluff more in position than out of position. Here, out of position, our check raises are very, very strong, which we've got going for us, and I really like. But by the same token, the board is wet, and we are out of position. So I would say 45 seems about right. And when I say the board's wet, I don't mean this is a terribly hard board to play out of position. But I do mean that hands like King 6, when we check raise them, they are going to get outdrawn by the turn of the river reasonably often. Flushes will get there, straights will get there, better 2 pairs will get there. So we don't want to go crazy check raise bluffing out of position here. So, I don't know the exact answer. This isn't perfect, but something like 45 seems, give or take, like a reasonable number. All right, so let's just try to get the obvious hands out. So gut shots, I think, are usually the most obvious ones. So let's see. We got 16. I'm just even gonna list all the gut shots. Check raises is gonna be, all right. So 10-9 is gonna give us 15 combos. 10-8 is gonna give us 15 combos. Then we have 9-4, 8-4, 5-3, 4-3. 9-5, 8-4, 5-3, 4-3. 9-5 suited. 8-5 or 8-4 suited. What was it? 5-3 suited. And 4-3 suited. Okay. Okay. Let's see how many combos that is right there. That already gets us to 42. So it already gets us to 42. And I like check raising with a little bit more 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight stuff that I think works a little bit better as check raises than check calls. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take at least the 10-9 and I'm going to put it in the check calling range. So, 10-9 is a hand where if we turn a pair of 10s or 9s, that's good. If we turn the gut shot, that's obviously amazing. And then if our opponent double barrels, it's a lot easier to fold a hand like, 10-9 to a double barrel than it would be to fold like a flush draw. A flush draw just sucks more to have to fold it. All right, so let's do that. And then this gives us a total of 27 combos so far. And what I would say now is I'm going to go looking for like the 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight stuff. Some of that 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight stuff is probably going to be check called too, but I want to check raise a lot of it as well. So I really quickly just added in a couple of check calls that were 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight, and a couple check raises. I wanted to check call the ace high. So for ace of spades 8x, I'd prefer to check call that because it has more showdown value. Whereas something like 10-5 of diamonds and jack-5 of diamonds, and even queen-5 of diamonds, I'd rather probably check raise. The other thing I want to mention is, of course, the backdoor flush draw with diamonds is better than having just one high card spade. Because when we have diamonds, if we make a flush, there'll be only 3 diamonds on the board, and we use both diamonds to make the flush. Whereas, of course, if it runner spades, and there's 4 spades on the board, and it's easier for our opponent to have a higher flush if we only have, the jack or the queen high flush. But nevertheless, we're still going to end up defending with some of those hands. So, for example, I would still check raise queen of spades, 5x, which is another 3 combos. I also decided to check call with the queen 8 of diamonds and the queen 9 of diamonds. And the reason why I did that is because queen 8 or queen 9 will make better pairs if we turn a pair than something like 10-5 of diamonds. This stuff's all very detailed, and it's not something I feel too passionately about. So, yeah, I would rather check raise 10-5 of diamonds and check call queen 9 of diamonds, which is why I listed them this way. But if I saw someone check raise this hand, I would have absolutely no problem with check raising queen 9 of diamonds here. So just be aware of this stuff. We have a lot of similar hands that are going to need to go into both, the weak check raising range and the check calling range. So just be aware that there's a lot of hands that are very similar, and we're going to need to put some in each range as we're doing right now. All right, so let's finish trying to find the last 12 weak check raises we need. So I think I would check raise with maybe something like ace of spades 5x and ace of spades 4x. Now, I think they can be check called as well, but I also think we're not often gonna want to use like our showdown value if we check call with ace 4 on the flop. It might make a profitable check call and it might be able to show down sometimes, but if we're being honest, if we randomly generate, let's say, a turn in a river, lock flop, lock turn, and you had something like ace 4, it's pretty unlikely, I think, that you're usually going to want to check it through. You're usually still going to want to turn a hand like ace 4 into a bluff by the river. So because of that, I don't feel too bad about check raising my ace 5 and ace 4 with the ace of spades on the flop, even though I know, when I check raise these hands, I'm not going to get to use their showdown value. So, of course, I don't know if it's theoretically better to call or if it's theoretically better to raise these hands, but I want to have, like, some high naked ace of spades in my range, and ace 5 and ace 4 are, ace 5 is 3 to a straight and the ace of spades, whereas ace 4 is pretty close to a 3 to straight and ace of spades, so I'm going to go ahead and check raise them. Again, I know I'm not going to get to use my showdown value if I check raise these, but I don't think showdown value is as important with a hand like ace 4 as it is with a hand like ace 8. So I'm going to go ahead and check raise them. For the last 6 combos, I'd like them to be some runner-runner diamond type of stuff. So we can just look at backdoor flush in Flopzilla. I love the way you can do this now. You used to not be able to just highlight all the backdoor flushes. All right, so I think it's probably okay to check raise. We already have the fives. We already have like the Jack 5 and 10-5 of diamonds. We might be able to check raise like the let's see. I'm trying to think of a few things. Like 9-4 of diamonds is going to work pretty well because 9-4 of diamonds is again 3 to the flush. And then it's effectively 3 to the straight. I'll show you why in just a second. 9-4 of diamonds, if we have the 9 and the 4, then any 8 gives us the open-ended straight draw, or any 5 gives us the open-ended straight draw. So I think check raising 9-4 diamonds seems fine. Let's see what else we got. I mean, you can tell this is very detailed and it's a bit time-consuming. I'd be doing this a little bit faster if I wasn't having to announce it while I was doing it, but it definitely takes time, and you have a lot of stuff that's close, which is why it's much more important to just understand conceptually why we're doing what we're doing, because in practice, even if you had the time to write out what you would do with every single hand, if in practice, you check raised queen 9 of diamonds when you wish you would have check called, that's so close that I don't think it's going to be a problem. All right, so I'm actually going to pause it on that note and add in some more hands so we go a little bit quicker. Okay. So I added in some more hand combos, which you can look at right here. This got us to 47, which is a little more than the 45, but that's close enough. And you'll notice I also added some more hands that I'm check calling. So my general idea here is I'm trying to check call with the diamonds that have 2 cards that are stronger than a 7 or a 6. So sort of 2 cards that can turn a middle pair. So like I'm check calling with Jack 9, Jack 8, Queen 9, Queen 8. And those hands are often going to be tricky to play on the turn. So I imagine a lot of people, when I say I check call with those hands because they have some nice robust equity, and also, they can just turn some reasonable middle pairs. Like, for example, let's take Jack 9. Let's just look at it real quick. Jack 9 of diamonds. Any 8 gives the open-ended straight draw. Any 9 gives us a pair. Any 10 gives us a effectively open-ended straight draw, right? That's a belly buster, or whatever kids call them these days. If let's say the turn was a 10 of clubs, right? And we have the Jack 9, then a Queen or the 8 both give us a straight. The Jack gives us a pair. The Queen gives us a gut shot, and then any diamond gives us the flush draw. So there's a lot of good turns with Jack 9 of diamonds. I will be the first to admit that it's a relatively difficult hand to play after check calling on the flop, because it's very awkward when you face another barrel and the turn's like a 10 of clubs. But I still think you're better off check calling with it than check raising it, because if we just end up check raising with all of our hands that aren't that great but have robust equity, well, we've kind of already done that, right? We have a lot of gut shots right here. These are all pretty much gut shots. Then we have a lot of backdoor 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight, 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight. Wow. 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight stuff right here. The ace-5 and the ace-4 weren't amazing hands, and we wanted a few high spades, was my logic. A couple more right here. And then these are the random close to 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight, weak diamonds too. So we already kind of have enough hands in our check raising range where I don't think we're going to be able to check raise all of these hands right here just because they have robust equity. The ace-8 people probably won't have a problem with because, it's still an ace-high. But these hands right here, the Queen-8, the Queen-9, they don't have as much showdown value, and they do have robust equity, but I still think they're going to work better as check calls because we can't check raise all those types of hands, and these ones make better middle pairs. Another option is we could take these 10-8s that we're check raising, because again, these also make good middle pairs. Maybe we should be check calling with these, and we can find a few other hands to check raise with. So that's the last thing I'm kind of thinking. And we still have the gut shots right here, so we're not getting rid of all of our gut shots if we take these 10-8s and move them to the check calling range. But that's also something that's might be a good idea. But again, at the end of the day, if I'm watching someone play or if I'm playing an opponent and someone check calls or check raises with 10-8 on this flop, I think both lines are pretty reasonable. I don't have a big problem. All right, so I'm going to pause again and add in a few more stuff and count some combos, and we'll go from there. All right, so I tallied it up, and we're check raising 77 times, which is 14.5% of the time. And right now we have 215 check calls, which would be, I can do that real quick, 215 divided by 520. We're probably going to add some more, but it would be we're check calling 41.3% of the time. So I think this is a pretty aggressive check raising range. Check raising 14.5% of the time seems like a lot. So maybe we should be check raise bluffing a tiny bit less, and maybe we should be slow playing these pocket 7s and pocket 6s. But until people are overbetting the next street regularly, and by overbetting the next street regularly, I mean they recognize the good overbet spots. So like if the turn card came like maybe a 2 of hearts, our opponent might be likely to bet pretty big at a pretty high frequency. Until people are doing that more regularly, I would not recommend slow playing hands, because it is risky to slow play a strong hand on a board like this. And unless your opponent's going to bet big at a high frequency on the right turn cards, I would just go ahead and play all the strong hands fast. But just so you know, if I had to guess, this check raising frequency seems a little bit high, so we could slow play some of this and bluff a little bit less. Okay, so I even forgot the draw check raises. 1 second, I'm going to recalculate. So it's an even higher check raise frequency. It's about 16.3%. So again, we probably could lower this frequency a little bit, check call a few more strong hands, and bluff a little bit less to lower this number, because right now we're check raising at a very high frequency. So what I'm really taking from this, because I haven't done a board like this with this range before, is there's a lot of hands on this flop in my range that have like a lot of robust equity that don't play that well as check calls, and I get very tempted to check raise with those hands, especially since I think a lot of times people don't check raise bluff aggressively enough to begin with. So I feel like I can put a lot of pressure on my opponents, and then if they just call my flop check raise and I double barrel when the turn card improves me, I'll get them to fold a lot, and then sometimes I'll get lucky on the river. Like, that's my gut. I want to do that. Yeah, I'm pumped. But then if I were to do that with all the hands I wanted to do that with, I'd be check raise bluffing way too much. Because to be honest, I still want to check raise bluff these, and I still want to check raise bluff these, the gut, like some of the gut shot stuff. Where are you, Mr. Gutters? The 10-9. I still want to check raise bluff these, even though I know, okay, I'm going to be check raise bluffing way too much if I do. So that's what I'm taking from this so far. I also want to find a few more combos to call with, because I'd like to defend a little bit more aggressively, if I can. So I just added in some more hands. So I'm check calling with Queen 10 off with the Queen of Spades, Queen X off with the 10 of Spades, Queen 9 and Queen 8 with the Queen of Spades, and Ace X with the 8 of Spades. So that means we're check calling 44%, and we're check raising 16.3%. So we're defending around 60.5% of the time. So whenever you're analyzing these spots, I think the hardest question to really answer, and no one's able to answer it, is how weak of a hand can we defend? Because right now, I can tell you, like, if I were playing heads up, like, heads up poker, not 6 max for button opens and small blind folds, but actual heads up, I would not fold Queen 10 off on this flop without the spade. Because I would still say to myself, like, well, Queen 10 off turns an open in a straight draw when I have a jack, and it turns a pretty good pair if I turn a queen or a 10. And if the turn card comes in 9, and 9 actually gives me like a weird straight draw thing too. I need to get better at noticing that. The 9 will give us the 8 straight on the river or the jack straight. So there's quite a few good outcomes that can happen when we check call Queen 10. In fact, there's enough that I just convinced myself. So I'm going to add in all the Queen 10 offs right here. But I don't know if this is right. I don't know. It's just my best guess, and there's no way to know this stuff for sure. So it always gets pretty difficult to exactly know like where you want to draw the line, and people just make their best guesses. There's really no way to calculate it. All right, so that's going to get us to about 61% total. Okay, the next thing I wanted to briefly mention is I just wanted to drive the point home that I also think in theory we're probably check raising too much, so we should probably take some of these hands that are both in the value check raising and the check raise bluffing range, move them to check calls. And the other thing that's cool about slow playing is, if we did want to check raise Queen 10 on the turn, if the turn card came like a jack, if we slow played some pocket 7s, pocket 6s, or some King 7, it's easier for us to check raise bluff on the turn because we have, the value check raises to balance that with. So even though we always have to be playing every hand in our range in the most profitable way possible, one cool thing to kind of see happen is if the more we slow play, not only will we get some, pick off some big bets from our opponent on the turn when he thinks we can't be strong, but it also will allow us to develop more elaborate check raising ranges, which will be nice when we check called with some of this stuff, turn to draw that didn't really want to check call again and we want to check raise it. So yeah, so I would say this is the range, and then if I was writing notes to myself, which I think is a really good thing to do when you're learning, and you should always be learning when you do this, is Note to self. So here's my little essay. My gut reaction on this board is to want to check raise too aggressively despite the fact I have a ton of reasonable value check raises. In other words, I have so many gut shots and 3 to a flush and 3 to a straight type hands that I would actually be check raise bluffing too much if I check raise them all. Because of that, I decided to put more emphasis on check calling with hands that have 6 outs to turn a reasonable pair. As we talked about, that's most of the hands that have 2 cards higher than a 7. I also decided to check raise bluff with some ace of spades 4x type hands because I don't think I'll be able to realize its showdown value particularly effectively if I check call. So I mentioned that before. Even though ace high is pretty nice, if we make a random turn and a random river, it's gonna be pretty tough to feel safe about checking ace 4 all the way down. So that was actually a reasonable turn and river runner for to do it. And so was that one. That one not as much. All right, so lastly, despite check calling nearly half of my range on the flop, about 1/3 of my check calling range is still top pair. So 72 top pairs and only a 230 or so check calls total. While more analysis on the turn and river is of course needed, it looks like we'll be able to defend this range reasonably well and won't have to ever call turn and river bets with a hand worse than medium pair. Sorry, forgot that word. Won't have to call turn and river bets with a hand worse than medium pair. Another thing that's pretty useful to do is sometimes I'll say, all right, well, let's assume my opponent bets the turn and river, and I want to call around 65% of the time on the turn and around 60% of the time on the river. Whoops, 0.65 times 0.6. Then that will mean, okay, about 40% of this range is going to call a turn and a river bet. So 236 combos times 0.4. I'll need to call down with like 94 combos. That's assuming I only defend by check calling the turn and river. Well, 94 combos, mostly top pair is going to take care of that. We'll also have to still call with some like 7Xs if nothing improves. But in reality, we're probably going to improve enough hands, like at least 20 combos will probably improve significantly, where the hands that I'm going to go check call, it's looking like they'll mostly just be King X hands, and then whatever improved out of this, bunch of hands right here that's not King X. So I know that was kind of long, and we're about to move on to our next hand, but just remember, this is probably the hardest range to play in 6 max. We have a ton of hand combos, our range is weak, and we're out of position. So this is going to be time consuming and difficult to really improve this aspect of your game. The last thing I want to point out too is we're only defending 61% of the time. So assuming our opponent bets like half pot on the flop, which is pretty normal, and if we defend with this exact range, then our opponent will be able to make an immediate profit by betting any 2 cards. And I have absolutely no problem with that. And that's also probably why our opponent is going to be betting too much. Because, even though we're letting him make an immediate profit betting any 2 cards, we're still defending 3/5 of the time, and we're defending pretty aggressively by raising here. So despite our opponent being able to bet any 2 cards profitably, he's still going to be making a big mistake if he bets with some hands that, just don't retain their equity well and play very poorly against our check raises. So overall, I like this range. Yeah, and I think I'm ready to move on to the next one. All right, boom. 2 queens and a 7. Okay. So hand number 2 is Queen of Hearts, Queen of Spades, Queen of 7. 7 of Hearts. And before I even jump into this hand, I just want to let you know, I've talked about in other videos, well, we do have a hand that has a queen. Now there's only 1 queen left in the deck. So it does encourage us to slow play a little bit more on this flop, and things do get a little bit trickier. We're not always going to slow play here, but when we have a queen, our opponent's more likely to be bluffing, and when we don't have a queen, our opponent's more likely to have value. So we'll still have some check raising range here, but it is very difficult to get this stuff to work really well because of removal effects. But nevertheless, we're still going to jump in and do the best we can. All right, so I just started doing this and deleted the recording because I rambled a bit, but on second thought, I don't like check raising anything here. So ignore what I just said 15 seconds ago, because the kind of hands that I like to check raise on this flop, and I imagine you guys do too, is you want to check raise like your good queens, like your ace queen, your king queen, maybe your queen jack. Something that's like, okay, if we have a queen now, we want to make sure we get a ton of value from our opponent's queens, and we have a really good kicker. And we also don't want to let our opponent see the turn in the river for free with all of his draws. So here, I don't think I would like check raising almost anything, though, because our queens just aren't that strong. You know, like the strongest queen we can have is queen 10, or our hand's so strong that we have something like queen 7 or pocket 7s that isn't vulnerable to giving free cards. So I don't think I would check raise anything here. Let me see how often the opponent has trips. The opponent has trips 11% of the time. Trips are better. Okay, so I imagine you could have some check raising range where maybe you're just check raising like queen 10 in some bluffs. But for the most part, you know, maybe we should do that just to be a little bit more precise. So let's say we're going to check raise queen 10, which is going to be 9 combos. And then we're going to, let's say, because the removal effect gets weird, so let's just say we're going to only check raise 9 bluffs because, again, if we have a queen, our opponent's less likely to have one, and if we don't, he's more likely to have one. So let's just say we're only going to check raise like 9 or 10 bluffs here. And then, yeah, we're going to check call with all the other weaker queens. And it's okay to have this really, really small check raising range as long as it's balanced. And it is going to be balanced because we're going to have some good hands and we're going to have some bad hands. Okay, but for the most part, we're not check raising very much here. Draw check raises. Okay, we'll check raise 2 flush draws. Again, we want to not have our range be too weighted towards any one type of hand. Let's even go 3 flush draws. Let's get crazy. Okay, and then we're going to check call everything else. So I would say let's check call the pocket 7s. Let's check call the queen 7, which is going to be another 6 combos. And then how many trips do we have that aren't a queen 7 or queen 10? So that's going to be the queen 9, queen 8, queen 6, queen 5, queen 4, queen 3, queen 2. I'm actually going to count them real quick and then I'll write it in. I'm going to pause real quick. Okay, so that was 44 queen X's. And then let's see how many 7s. Let's see, we have any middle pairs we have. We have just pocket 8s. I mean middle pocket pairs below top pairs, just pocket 8s. So let's get that in. 8 to 6. And let's see how many 7X's we have. Middle pair is going to be, so 7X is going to be 42 combos. Alright, so this range we're going to have to try quite a bit harder to defend. Okay, and then weak pair. I think we're going to end up calling those 2s, so that's 6s to 2s, so that's another 30 combos. Alright. Okay. So, we have a lot of work to do on this one. So we're going to have to do a lot of ace-high calling. So, I'm again going to total stuff up real quick. I don't need to pause for that, I guess. 6, 6, 12, 44, 56, 62, 104, 134. So we have 134 combos right now. So we're not defending, I think, anywhere near as many combos as we want to defend. And then we're also going to have another 20 or so combos that we're check raising. And then for the check raises, I'm just going to write down like XX of spades. We're gonna check raise like 9 combos that are probably mostly made up of like backdoor spade hands, which we'll figure out in a minute. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's get the ace high hands. So here we're gonna at least like, let's say we call with ace, like ace 9 and ace 8. I think are gonna call for sure with all the combos. So that's gonna be 30 combos total. We don't want to double count the flush draws. We'll get to those in a minute. And then we also are going to, I think, want to check a call with ace 6, ace 5, ace 4, ace 3, ace 2 if we have a heart. At least the ace of hearts, maybe even the lower heart too. So let's think. Let's say we check call with the 7. Let's say we check call with 7 ace 6 combos and 7 ace 5 combos. Or no, sorry, 6 ace 6 combos and 6 ace 5 combos. So that's the ace 6, you know, with a heart, ace 5 with a heart, so that's 6 each. And then for the weakest ace highs, and they're not that different from ace 5 or ace 6, they're almost the same hand. But let's just say for ace 4, ace 3, ace 2, we're just going like ace of hearts, and then between, you know, ace of hearts 4x, ace of hearts 3x, ace of hearts 2x. That gets us another 9 combos. Okay. The last thing to note is the only suited ace we have is ace 8 of spades. So ace 8 of spades, we go 1. That's going to check call. Okay, cool. So now we can total this up again, since so that we have from the 134 we have another 30, 36, 42, 51, 52. So 52 plus 134. So we have 186 combos right now. Still got a ways to go, but we're getting there. And notice, everything we have so far has showdown value. Now, again, I'm not thrilled with like ace-3, although I think ace-3 is better on this board because there's just less possible hands the opponent can have that beat ace-3. But for the most part, you know, all these hands do have showdown value, even if the showdown value isn't the greatest. And other than these really weak aces right here, the showdown value is actually quite good. These are all pairs or better. And then ace-9 or ace-8 are just pretty good aces. So we can definitely throw out a lot of hands that don't have showdown value. But let's start with the flush draw. So we check called with, we said we were going to check raise bluff 3 flush draws. Cool. And then there's 31 here, so let's make it 28. So 28 flush draws are going to check call. Okay. And then we're also going to have a lot of like, we're going to be check calling, for example, with a lot of like, even like king high stuff that has the backdoor draws. Like king 9 and king 8 can both turn very good pairs. So let's say for like king 9 or king 8, we're going to check a call with one as long as it has the king of hearts or the backdoor spades. So it'd be something like king of hearts 9x is 3, and then king of spades 9 of spades. Is that in our range? Yeah. The king of spades 9 of spades is 1. So I'll add in a few of those. I'll pause and add in a few of those, and then we'll start talking again. Okay. So I added some more hands, and I actually somewhat finished off this hand, but I want to explain everything. So here you can see I added all of the like king 9s that have, you know, king 9 with the king of hearts, king 9 of spades, king 8 with the king of hearts, king 8 of spades. I didn't add in king 7 off with this, or sorry, I didn't add in king 6 off with the king of hearts, but I do have the king 6 of spades, king 5, king 4, king 3, and king 2 of spades as all being calls. For the weak check raised, I check raised the suited 10s that had draws to worse pairs but more robust equity. And even the term worse pair is kind of misleading because something like, you know, 10-9 of spades, for example, I think draws to better pairs than something like king 2 of spades. But king 9 of spades still had a more robust equity where I could turn a jack or an 8 to give the open-ended straight draw. So I decided to raise it, but in reality, I think calling with king 10 of spades would be totally fine. It might even be better. Sorry I keep saying in this video. It's just a hard video to do and not I'm even doing it while I'm talking about doing it. Sorry for all the ums and delays in this video. I'm just trying to think ahead while I talk, and it's kind of hard for this video. So, king 9 of spades, I would go ahead and I went ahead and raised it, but I think calling it would be fine too. We have those similar types of hands right here, where these are hands that, you know, have draws to a good middle pair. Jack 10, 10-9 would also make a pretty good call, I think, too. And then I also called with all of the king 10s. King 10, I feel like it just makes good enough pairs that we want to call with it. And with defending all these combos, we're still only defending 53% of the time. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is, as of right now, I'm still folding with some like backdoor spade draws. So for example, I'm not defending, let's look. Jack 6 of spades isn't in any of these ranges. So the next hands we could start defending would be like Jack 6 of spades, 10-9 off, you know, and you can have a heart. Or hands like that, or the king of hearts 6x. So like these are, I think, the next strongest hands that I'm not defending with if I want to get over 53%. I have no problem with check calling with these types of hands right here. But this is, I think, a harder board to defend, because if you look at like the last board, we had 72 kings that we could check call with. Whereas in this board, we're only check calling with 44 trips, and then we have just much, much fewer pairs, right? We have 7 pairs we have 42 pairs of 7x in this range. We had 42 of 7x in the last range too, but we also had pairs of 6s, whereas we don't have that here. So it's just a harder board to defend. So you need to defend, you know, the opponent's range will probably be weaker too. We can go look. But the opponent's range will have obviously a lot less pairs too. Let's see how often the button has pairs. So the button has a weak pair or better 33.5%, whereas the big blind flat has a weak pair or better 26.7%. So we do have less pairs. Let's see how often the button has trips. The button has trips or better, I should say, 11%. We have trips or better, around 11% too. So even though the button's range is better than ours, it's not that much better than ours. And I don't want to turn this into a ramble, but if we want to defend wider, I think we're going to need to defend with these types of hands right here. Now, one of the frustrating things, of course, is you don't know in theory whether or not these hands are calls. But I like the hand 10-9 off, so I'm going to go ahead and add that right now. And I'm going to go ahead and put 10-9 off with a 6 next to it, so just know, I mean, we have to have one heart. We could also do the same thing with a hand like Jack-9 off. Jack-9 off with a 6 of hearts, or sorry, with a 6 next to it for any heart. So I think those are like the next best hands to start defending with, and I think they're totally fine. We could do 10-8 if we wanted, though I think I'm going to pass on that for now. And then we could also add in a few of the, Jack-6 suited, Jack-5 suited. What else did we have? Are there any 10s I wanted to call with that I haven't already used? Not so much. So maybe we call with more suited Jacks than Jack-4 suited, Jack-3 suited for another 4 combos. And then now, again, we're already check calling with a good amount of naked high hearts. So I don't really know if I want to defend the King of Hearts 6x. Because with the King of Hearts 6x, if I turn a king, obviously the pair of kings is a good pair, but we have a very, very weak kicker. Whereas if I turn the 6, then I still lose to pairs of 7s. Whereas if we just call with a hand like 10-9 off, I think it's going to make better quality pairs, and it just has more outs to like straights. So I think 10-9 is definitely better than, I shouldn't say definitely. I think 10-9 is better than King-6. So I'm not going to defend this hand. I'm going to defend this stuff. So we just added another 16 hands to our range to get this to 268. Then calculator. So 20 hands are raising, 20 plus 268. So 286 hands divided by 513 is we're defending 55.7%. And again, it's up to you if you want to defend wider than that. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for a minute and write my notes from what I kind of found while working with this board, and then we'll talk about it in a second. So here's my analysis. I had some initial thoughts that I actually wrote down before we finished the hand, and then I had some later thoughts after we finished it. So my initial thoughts were, I don't really like check raising the flop with any hand very much, but if I never check raise, then my flop check calling range might have too many very strong hands on the turn. In other words, I'll be weighted towards having trips. This not only will encourage my opponent to check back the turn more often, but he'll also know when he's betting the flop, he'll never face a check raise. Because of this, I think we should check raise the flop at least a little bit, and I chose Queen 10 to do it with. My later thoughts were this. This board was harder to defend than I predicted, by quite a lot. On the King 7-6 board with a flush draw, we had 204 pairs or better on the flop, whereas on this texture we only have 137 pairs. Because of this, it's possible we should just check call Queen 10 on the flop, since our check calling range won't be very strong on the turn, even if we, I should say, always slow play. So even if we always slow play or never raise. I don't really like the term slow play all that much. It's tough to say here. So all I'm getting at here is, at first I didn't want to call with all of our queens on the flop because I thought it would make our turn range a little bit too strong and too weighted towards trips. But once I've seen how weak this range is now I'm not really that opposed to check calling on the flop with Queen 10. If I had to guess, you still probably want to check raise on the flop a little bit, so it seems reasonable to check raise Queen 10 in the bluffs that we used. But it's really tough to say, and I don't have a strong opinion. Another thing I noted. One mistake I think I'm making is I'm not putting enough emphasis on calling with hands that have 6 outs to make middle pair. In other words, I'm not realizing how good a hand like 10-9 on a Queen-Queen 7 board is. 10-9 has 6 outs to pretty good pairs, and it has 8 outs to an open-ended straight draw. I need to rethink how weak my big blind fighting range is and be prepared to play these hands more aggressively. I must get better at realizing when a hand is effectively 3 to the straight, even if I don't have 3 consecutive cards. And so what I mean by effectively 3 to the straight, it just means that since this is a 7, any 8 will give us an open-ended straight draw. And since this is a queen, any jack will give us an open-ended straight draw. So here, just like if we have 3 to a straight, we usually have 8 there's 8 cards on the turn that will give us 4 to a straight. Here, even though we only have 2 consecutive cards, there's still 8 cards on the turn that will give us that'll give us a open-ended straight draw, or 4 to the straight. So now, on one hand, I totally get how, if you're looking at this range, especially if you play pretty low stakes, these hands seem crazy, crazy loose and bad, and you probably want to fold them. Like, your gut reaction is, ew, I just want to fold them and just fold a ton on the flop. And honestly, I probably don't have a big problem with you doing that. It's very hard to tell exactly how aggressively we should defend. These hands are going to be very hard to play, so if you're going to make more mistakes later when you're out of position, you're probably better off just folding them. So if this range seems super, super aggro to you, then fine, play it quite a bit tighter. I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. In other words, I don't expect check calling 10-9 off on the flop to be highly profitable, even if it is profitable in theory. I will say this, though. If I had to guess if this pre-flop cold calling range is too wide or too weak against a button min-raise, if I had to guess, this range might even be a little bit tight. Hands like Jack-7 off might be profitable calls pre-flop, even though we folded with them. So I don't think this is too wide of a pre-flop range we're using when facing a mid-raise. And I also think, I know we're only defending on this flop 55% of the time. So our opponent's flop C-bet of about half pot is pretty profitable here. We have to defend at least 67% of the time to prevent him from making an immediate profit, and we're only defending 55% of the time here. We're defending over 10% less often than we would need to prevent him from making an immediate profit. So even though we have a weak pre-flop range and we are calling with a lot of weak hands here, we're still not defending all that often. So I always love it when I'm done analyzing a hand, and if everything kind of came together and I noticed some cool stuff and there was already some concepts that I knew that I got to point out and everything works perfectly and we can talk about what we learned. That doesn't seem like it's going to be the case here. It's a really difficult spot to analyze, and while I definitely think I took some stuff from this and I hope you took some stuff from it too, I would recognize just how hard it is to defend out of position and how, if you're like me, you weren't putting enough emphasis on calling with hands that had like 6 outs towards making a middle pair, like with something like Jack-9 or 10-9 right here. And those hands probably need to be defended. Now, I have no problem if you want to say, you know what, I think the button's range is way stronger than the big blind's range here. I think the button has the advantage of position. So if that's the case, you might want to fold more often than we're folding, even though we're already folding pretty often here. So, I think it's fine to muck these types of hands. Jack-9, 10-9, Jack-5, even something like King-10, you might not be able to make a profit with it. They're hard to play and you're out of position. So especially at lower limits, if you want to just fold them, that's fine. I wouldn't get too aggressive with them. But I would at least start realizing this stuff now, especially because if you play like heads-up poker, then this big blind cold calling range is probably stronger than a heads-up big blind cold calling range is when you face a min-raise. And we're still going to have all these problems we're talking about, even if the button has a weaker range, right? We're still going to need to defend like with random stuff like 10-9 probably by check calling. So I know as I've only started to play a little bit of heads-up, I'm definitely taking stuff for heads-up play from what we're doing now because it really just looks like you have to get quite aggressive with a lot of hands that just have like middle cards. And that's not something I realize, and that's going to be something I think that's pretty difficult to do. So I imagine when you're on the button and you're playing against your opponents, you should expect them to fold way too often on boards like this because it's just very difficult to defend the hands that probably need to be defended. So hopefully that was pretty clear. And I'm going to be honest, my brain's pretty fried right now. I think this is the hardest video I've ever made for card runners. Just super wide out of position ranges are tough when you're writing down every hand combo. And we're going to keep marching on. But hopefully this stuff is clear. If you have questions, ask me in the forums. It's pretty difficult stuff. But hopefully I'm still making sense and you guys are taking a good amount from this. Okay, let's randomly generate another one and hopefully it will be enlightening as the last two were. All right, so King, Queen, 6. So again, this one I think is going to be our easiest one to defend. So yay for an easy one now. All right, let's do it. Okay. So let's go ahead and put in our strong check raises. There's going to be a lot of gut shots in your opponent's range when he has like ace-jack, ace-10, 10-9. Jack-10's open-ended. So you definitely can justify raising some hands here because you don't want to give maybe a ton of free cards to your opponent when he has gut shots. So let's go ahead and raise the 2-pair stuff and we'll slow play the 6s. So we'll go ahead and call with pocket 6s. We'll get all tricky with that. And then we'll go ahead and raise. We'll raise King 6 and Queen 6. And if you wanted to call with some of these hands too, I have no problem with it. Again, just not a big deal. It's not a big deal. All right. So let's do the top pair stuff. Top pair. Oh, yeah, that's nice. 100. It's already just like a refreshing stream. 84 combos of top pair. This is going to be so much easier than the last hand. King X, 84. How about Queen X? Oh, yeah, 75. That's good stuff right there. Queen X, 75. Easy peasy. Okay, how about our middle pairs? Or whatever, the aces and sevens. Cool. Cool. That's another 12 combos there. 6X is going to be how many? Weak pair. 6X. I don't want the under pairs here. So there's 24 under pairs, 5s, 4s, 3s, and 2s. We have 60 combos here. 60 minus 24, 36. 6X, 36. Okay. So that's kind of like the super obvious stuff, which was a lot right off the bat. And then now we can kind of do the whole, hey, or, you know, the stuff we're really comfortable with. So we're going to, I think we can check raise. Let's start with check raising, like I think a lot of the 3 to a flush, 3 to the straight, and we'll have a lot of it here. So weak check raises, let's do, you know, like 7-5 suited. Is that in our range? No, it's not. So let's do 5-4 suited. 5-4 suited, 3. Even stuff like 4-3 suited is probably fine. 7-4 suited is probably fine. I'm going to go ahead and add these in right now just to save time. All right, so that was super easy. And if you'll notice, this is all like 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight stuff. The Jack X gives us pretty close to 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight. I mean, it's 3 cards in a row, but obviously the ace doesn't give us the open to straight draw on the turn. But we're check raising pretty much the suited jacks, and then a lot of this janky stuff that's like pretty close to 3 to a straight and all 3 to a flush. So really robust, low equity hands. So that seems good. I also decided to check raise a little bit of draw, which is half the jack. I decided to check raise half the jack 10 and check all half the jack 10. This check raising range is very, very polarized right here. So we can add in some hands like jack 10 that don't want to face a 3-bet, because to be honest, if we check raise this flop, our opponent's probably 3-betting at such a low frequency that it's kind of cool to check raise jack 10, because you can check raise jack 10, bet the turn, and a lot of times you're pretty much always going to see a turn card, and a lot of times your opponent will continue slow playing even if he does have a very strong hand on the turn. So that seems good there. All right, so let's finish up with the check calls. So we have the 6 jack 10. We have all of our gut shots. And these would probably be fine to check raise on the flop too, rather than check call. Jack 9, 16. And it was 10, 9, another 16 combos. Yeah, so something I'm definitely noticing here is it's much easier to have, you know, the hands that 3-bet bluff than it is to have the value 3-bet hands, even on boards where we have a lot of 2-pair combos. Okay, so what else do we want to check call? Well, let's check call the suited aces. Let's see what that gets us to. Anything else before? I think I'm going to just tally it up right now and see how many combos we have, because right now it looks pretty good to me, but I don't know if we're too wide or too tight. Okay, so I tallied everything up, and we're defending 323 combos total, or 63.1%. That's a good amount of defending. Everything looks pretty normal and pretty clear here. So, as will usually be the case if you do this type of analysis, you're going to see that when the board comes 2 high cards, so basically if the board comes 2 cards that are 10 or higher, so anything like Ace Jack or, you know, King 10 high, these boards are usually not that difficult to defend. It's when you get a board that only has 1 high card where it gets trickier, and what gets trickiest still is if you have a board that's something like this, where there's no high cards, but these boards are rare. So yeah, with this board right here, we had 2 high cards, both the Queen and the King, pretty easy to defend. I'll put that up once more in case you want to pause the screen, but I think for the most part, no one's probably too confused on defending this range. So if I was going to write some analysis here, I would actually just write like nothing too interesting or out of the ordinary. Here, check raise with hands which have very robust equity, like, you know, what was a good example of one? You know, like let's say something like 10-8 suited looks fine. Like 10-8 suited or 7-4 suited. I think those both make good check raises. And a couple of gut shots, or a couple of open-ended straight draws. Alright, so I finished writing it in. So check raise with hands with very robust equity, a couple of open-ended straight draws in addition to all of our value check raises, and then check call with gut shots to buff later if the turn checks through. And of course, the bulk of our check calling range will be pairs of kings and queens. So again, a very simple board, a pretty easy one to do. So let's go on to hand number 4 and see what we get for this. Okay, so this was the nightmare flop that we talked about, which I am willing to do and will do. But I can tell you already right now, I mostly defend on these flops by check folding a lot, because if we look, our range is just very, very weak here relative to the buttons. The button has an overpair 14.5% of the time. We have an overpair 8% of the time. And then the button has the advantage of being in position, and position is tremendously valuable on this flop. Every single hand is either a super good draw or has overcards. So there's no way to tell exactly how aggressively we're going to need to defend, and I am going to write down the combos here, but I can tell you right now I'm mostly going to be defending by check, or I'm mostly not going to be defending very aggressively and will be check folding. All right, so I input our flop and the total amount of combos, and we have 541. So that's more combos than we had before, which should already tell you we didn't make that many pairs here. And the thing I want to point out here is when you check call on this flop, your range usually isn't going to be completely capped on the turn. Like if the turn card comes like an 8, for example, you'll have made some 2 pairs. You'll have made a 2 pair with 8-5 suited. Or if the turn's a 9, you'll have made a 2 pair with 9-5 and 9-3 suited. But you're really not making very many. So it's a super tricky board because on one hand, it's hard to slow play your strong hands because they can so easily be outdrawn. But on the other hand, if you don't slow play anything, your range gets really, really vulnerable on the turn. So what I would do is I would raise the sets. So let's raise 5s, 3s, and 2s. Let's see if we have any 2 pairs, though. I don't think we do. All right, we have 5-3 suited. So that gets us 11 combos total. So let's make those like our raises. And then let's say we're going to raise... How many straights do we have? We have ace-4 and 6-4 suited. So let's say we're going to raise half of our straights. So let's say we raise the 6-4 suited. And let's say we raise 4 of the ace-4. And then let's say we check call with 4 of the ace-4, or 8 of the ace-4. Okay. So we're still going to be raising this board with our good hands for the most part, but we're calling with some good hands to, you know, make it so we're not we're not as vulnerable to double barrels, I should say. Maybe we should be slow playing a little bit more. In fact, I feel like we kind of should, so I'm going to make this actually 10 of the ace-4s we check call. But of course, I don't know the answer. I'm just stabbing in the dark here. And then after that, now we're going to just go ahead and write down all the obvious stuff first. So let's start with what we're going to be check calling with. So let's see, we have, how much top pair we have? We have 48 combos of 5x. We have middle pair, or we have 6 combos of 4s. And you can do some tricky stuff with like pocket 4s on the flop. I guess you could check raise, but I'm just going to check call them. We have 36 combos of a weak pair, sorry, of middle pair. We have 36 combos, so 36 combos of 3x. We have 30 combos of bottom pair. All right, and that's 2x. Okay. And then I would also probably check call, it's like our ace-9, I would say let's check call our ace-9s to ace-7s. So that's going to be, actually, let's make it ace-9, ace-8, and ace-6. So ace-9 is 12 combos, ace-8 is 16 combos because we have the suited, ace-7 is 16 combos. Actually, let's just do the suited ace-7. And then let's call with the ace-6, as I said. And ace-6 is going to be 12 combos. Okay, so those are our ace-high hands we're check calling with. We can check call with some of the higher suited stuff, too. So, like, I'm going to go ahead and pause and list some of it. Or actually, let's not do that yet. Let's add in the open-ended straight draws. So let's say we're going to check raise some of the open-ended straight draws and check call with some. So I don't want to double count these. So we've already counted the 4s, the 5-4 suited, the 4-3 suited. So that's going to mean that's 12 combos we need to take off. So there's 48 draws, straight draws. So I don't want to list these all out. So let's say for the draw check raises, let's say we're going to check raise like 6 of them. And then let's say we're going to check call like 42 of them. Straight draw 42. Okay. And then we also want to add in some of like the higher suited stuff. So let's add in like King 9 suited to King 6 suited. So that's going to give us 12. Let's add in Queen 10 suited. Oh, actually, we don't have Queen 10 suited. Sorry. Let's add in like Queen 9 and Queen 6 suited. So Queen 9 suited, Queen 6 suited, because the Queen 6 suited has the gut shot. I don't even really love floating with hands like Jack 9 of clubs, so I'm probably going to check raise those. I might want to check raise like the Jack 6 suited and the 10 6 suited though. So let's actually do that. 10 6 suited, Jack 6 suited, and we call the Queen 6 suited. All right. Is there anything else I'm missing? Like, is there anything else I really want to be defending that I'm just not seeing? I guess we could check raise the 9 6 suited too. So this was 17 combos we were check raising. So actually we can get a good amount of bluffs here. We can probably get like 31 bluffs or something. So we need quite a few more bluffs than this, which is something good to know. So we have the 9 6 suited, we have the 9 6 suited, the 10 6 suited, the Jack 6 suited. I'm going to pause for a moment and add some more suited stuff, but it's even hard to find like 3 to a flush, 3 to a straight here, but I'm going to pause and do it. All right, so I added in some of the higher 3 to a flush type hands. These are not 3 to a straight. So in case we check raise the flop, with Jack 9 of clubs, we can turn a Jack or a 9 or a club. And then I also check raise with some King 6 off, which I'm not in love with, but King 6 off does have a pair of kings, which is obviously an awesome turn, or gut shots. And I don't think our opponent will be floating us with too many kings on the flop, so this might actually play a little bit better than it looks. But that gets us to 31 combos. So, one thing that I try to look at when I'm using these ranges is to make sure I have some hands that have no showdown value that can bluff later. So, in this case, it'd be like the King 9 suited stuff, the Queen 9, the Queen 6 suited stuff. And we might turn a hand like, we probably do turn a hand like, we can turn a hand like A6 into a bluff later if we want. But I want to make sure that I don't only have hands that have showdown value in my check calling range, because I know I need some stuff that can bluff later. So something like that seems reasonable, though to be honest, it's really hard to tell what will even be value betting later or bluffing later, because the turn and the river are going to change the board texture so incredibly much. We know we're going to value bet ace 4. After that, it's pretty hard to tell. We might not even be value betting the 5s, but we might be. It depends on the turn and the river. All right, so let's go ahead and tally this up. So 10, 40, I'll tally it up real quick. So I tallied it up, and here I am defending a total of 53.1%. So I knew I wasn't going to defend as much on this board as I was on other boards. This might be defending too aggressively, to be honest. Maybe we should fold even more. I'm definitely not in love with check calling with a lot of like stuff like ace 8 off. Like, I'm really not into it. So it's possible that stuff should just be folded. I don't know. But this is one board where I do feel like you should not be defending nearly as aggressively on as something like the King Queen 6 that hits our range much better. And position's also less valuable on the Queen King 6 than it is here. Position's just a huge deal. Okay, so that sums up what was pretty much the hardest video I've ever made for card runners. So go ahead and let me know any questions and comments you have in the forums. I can do another video like this if there's demand for it, but I'm not planning on doing another big blind versus button and single raise pots, though I will do it for 3-bet pots. But if people want another video like this, I can do it, but I'm planning on just this being the one, and hopefully you can see how to approach it yourself if you decide to do this kind of work on your own. So thanks for watching, everyone. I know this was kind of dense. I hope you learned something from it, and good luck at the tables. Bye.